Jean-Paul Sartre's encounter with Marxism marks one of the most difficult and revealing moments in his philosophy. Up to this point, Sartre's work has focused relentlessly on freedom, responsibility, bad faith, and the individual's confrontation with meaning. Marxism appears, at first glance, to stand in opposition to this entire framework. Where Sartre emphasizes choice, Marxism emphasizes structure. Where Sartre insists on responsibility, Marxism analyses necessity. Where Sartre begins with consciousness, Marxism begins with material conditions. Sartre does not ignore this tension, he walks directly into it. His turn toward Marxism is not a conversion, it is an acknowledgement of a limit. Sartre comes to believe that existentialism, on its own, cannot adequately explain history, class, or large-scale social forces. It can describe how individuals live their freedom, but it struggles to explain why freedom appears so unevenly distributed, why oppression persists, and why entire populations seem trapped in conditions they did not choose. This recognition does not lead Sartre to abandon existentialism. It leads him to confront what existentialism lacks. Sartre insists that any philosophy that takes freedom seriously must also take material conditions seriously. Hunger, poverty, labor, war, colonialism, and class are not background noise to freedom. They shape the field of possibility itself. To speak of choice without addressing these conditions risks turning freedom into abstraction. This is where Marxism enters. For Sartre, Marxism offers the most powerful account of how material conditions structure social life. It explains how economic relations shape institutions, ideologies, and lived experience. It shows how individuals inherit situations that are not merely personal, but historical. Sartre does not dispute this analysis. He believes existentialism must incorporate it or become irrelevant. But from the beginning, Sartre refuses Marxism as a closed system. He rejects any version of Marxism that treats history as a process unfolding according to fixed laws. Determinism for Sartre is unacceptable, not because it is false in every detail, but because it eliminates responsibility. If history moves inevitably toward a given outcome, then human action becomes secondary, even theatrical. Sartre refuses this reduction. He insists that history is made by human beings acting under constraint. Structures matter, but they do not act on their own. Economic forces shape situations, but they do not decide responses. Classes exist, but individuals still choose how to inhabit them. This insistence puts Sartre at odds with orthodox Marxism. Classical Marxism tends to prioritize objective conditions over subjective experience. Sartre believes this priority produces blindness. Without attention to lived experience, Marxism becomes abstract. It explains movement, but not meaning. Sartre's project is therefore not synthesis, but tension. He wants to preserve Marxism's analysis of structure while refusing its tendency toward determinism. He wants to preserve existentialism's account of freedom while refusing its tendency toward individualism. Each philosophy corrects the other and threatens to undo it. This tension becomes explicit when Sartre addresses class consciousness. Marxism often treats class consciousness as emerging from material position. Sartre insists that consciousness cannot be reduced to position. Two individuals in the same class may live their situation in radically different ways. Class explains pressure, not response. At the same time, Sartre rejects the idea that freedom floats above class. One does not choose one's class position. One is thrown into it. Freedom operates within that thrownness, not outside it. This dual claim is essential to Sartre's Marxism. Freedom is real, but it is not evenly distributed. Responsibility persists, but it is exercised under unequal conditions. To deny either side is to falsify experience. Sartre therefore treats Marxism as indispensable but incomplete. This incompleteness becomes most visible in Marxism's tendency to treat individuals as bearers of historical roles. Workers, bourgeois, revolutionaries, and reactionaries appear as functions within a process. Sartre resists this functionalism. To treat individuals as roles is to erase bad faith, anguish, and responsibility, precisely the phenomena Sartre believes define human existence. For Sartre, a revolution carried out by people who see themselves as instruments of history is already morally corrupted. Even revolutionary action must be owned as choice, not destiny. This insistence makes Sartre an uneasy ally of Marxism. He supports many Marxist political aims, but he refuses to grant Marxism moral authority. He does not allow it to function as a justification machine. This refusal will later put Sartre in conflict with communist parties, revolutionary movements, and historical narratives that demand loyalty and silence. Sartre accepts the cost of this conflict. He believes that political commitment without responsibility is worse than political hesitation. At this stage, Sartre's position is still provisional. He has not yet fully articulated how freedom and structure coexist. He knows only that neither can be abandoned. Existentialism without Marxism becomes blind to history. Marxism without existentialism becomes blind to responsibility. Sartre insists that any serious philosophy must endure this contradiction rather than resolve it cheaply. This endurance will push Sartre toward new concepts: situation, praxis, scarcity, and collective action. It will also force him to confront questions of violence, revolution, and political justification more directly than ever before. But before those developments can be understood, the tension itself must be made explicit. If Sartre turns toward Marxism because existentialism alone cannot explain history, then the second movement of his thought is even more unsettling. Marxism, Sartre comes to believe, cannot explain history either, at least not in the way it often claims to. It explains structures, but it risks erasing agency. It explains necessity, but it risks abolishing responsibility. Sartre refuses to accept this cost. At the center of Sartre's engagement with Marxism is a single question: how can history be structured without becoming deterministic? If material conditions shape human life so deeply, how can freedom remain real rather than illusory? Sartre's answer is radical. He insists that history is neither a mechanical process nor a series of isolated choices. It is a field of constrained action, produced by human praxis under conditions of scarcity, conflict, and pressure. This move shifts the meaning of both freedom and structure. For Sartre, material conditions do not act, they constrain. Scarcity, class relations, and economic systems shape what is possible, but they do not decide what is done. History happens because human beings act within these limits, often desperately, often under coercion, but never as mere mechanisms. This insistence forces Sartre to revise Marxism at a fundamental level. Orthodox Marxism often treats individuals as effects of objective conditions. Consciousness appears as reflection rather than initiative. Sartre rejects this entirely. Consciousness is not a mirror of material reality. It is a project that takes reality up in specific ways. This is why Sartre insists that class does not think. People think as members of classes under class pressure, but never as pure functions of class position. Class explains constraint. It does not explain commitment. This position places Sartre in direct conflict with Marxist determinism. If history unfolds according to laws, then responsibility becomes secondary. Political actors become instruments. Violence becomes inevitable rather than chosen. Sartre refuses this picture. For Sartre, even revolution is a choice. Even resistance under extreme oppression remains an act of freedom. This does not mean resistance is easy, safe, or morally pure. It means it cannot be treated as destiny. This insistence transforms Marxism into something far more fragile. Sartre introduces the concept of praxis. to describe this fragility. Praxis is action that transforms material conditions while being shaped by them. It is neither free creation nor mechanical reaction. It is action under pressure. Praxis allows Sartre to explain how individuals participate in history without being absorbed by it. A strike, a revolt, or a political movement is not simply the expression of economic forces. It is a collective decision to act in a particular way at a particular moment. But this also means that collective action is never innocent. Sartre refuses to allow collectives to function as moral shields. A party, a movement, or a class does not absolve individuals of responsibility. Participation is still a choice. Silence is still a choice. Loyalty is still a choice. This refusal leads Sartre into open conflict with communist orthodoxy. Marxist parties often demand discipline, unity, and silence in the name of historical necessity. Sartre resists these demands. He supports many revolutionary goals, but he refuses unconditional allegiance. He insists on the right and the obligation to judge. This position costs Sartre politically. He is accused of bourgeois individualism, moralism, and indecision. Sartre accepts these accusations rather than abandon responsibility. He believes that political commitment without judgment becomes tyranny. This belief deepens Sartre's tragedy. If history is structured but not determined, then no political action can claim guaranteed legitimacy. Success does not prove righteousness. Failure does not prove error. Political actors must act without knowing whether history will vindicate them. This uncertainty does not paralyze Sartre, it hardens him. Sartre insists that political action must accept its own violence, compromises, and exclusions without pretending they are redeemed by the future. Marxism often promises that suffering will be justified by the society it produces. Sartre refuses this promise. No future state erases present responsibility. This refusal explains why Sartre's Marxism never stabilizes. It is not a system. It is a constant tension between necessity and freedom. Sartre refuses to resolve that tension because resolving it would require sacrificing one side. Existentialism without Marxism becomes blind to material suffering. Marxism without existentialism becomes blind to responsibility. Sartre insists that philosophy must endure this contradiction rather than flee it. This endurance reshapes Sartre's understanding of politics itself. Politics is not the application of historical laws. It is a series of decisions made under pressure, each carrying consequences that cannot be fully controlled or justified in advance. This is why Sartre believes political actors must reject moral innocence. To act politically is to act in a world of competing freedoms, structural violence, and scarcity. No action remains clean. To pretend otherwise is bad faith. Sartre's engagement with Marxism therefore leads him to a bleak but honest position. Political action is necessary. Inaction is also a choice. History cannot be escaped, but neither can responsibility. This position explains why Sartre often appears contradictory, supporting revolutionary movements while criticizing their methods, defending oppressed peoples while condemning political lies, rejecting moral absolutism while demanding ethical seriousness. These are not inconsistencies, they are the cost of refusing determinism. By the end of this analysis, Sartre's position should be clear. He does not reconcile Marxism and existentialism. He holds them in tension. He does not offer a theory that explains history completely. He refuses theories that excuse action. He does not promise political clarity. He demands political responsibility. Sartre's Marxism is therefore not a doctrine. It is a demand placed on Marxism itself. Do not erase the human being in the name of history. And this demand will push Sartre even further, toward questions of collective violence, revolutionary justification, and the limits of political commitment. Those questions are unavoidable once freedom enters history.